Kickoo has gone through some changes recently. Instead of whales, we have starfish. Instead of battleships, ships, and boats, we have bombers, rammers, scouts, juggernauts, and rafts. So how to best play Kickoo? In this strategy guide, you will see how to use the water to your advantage, advice for playing Kickoo on land maps, and lots of tips and tricks for naval strategy. Welcome to the Poly Champions YouTube. Okay, let's learn to play Kickoo. Kickoo is a T0 tribe that starts with fishing. Most of the time, that means getting 2 fish and a workshop in your capital. Send your warrior in a direction you're most likely to find villages. That means towards resources that indicate a village, or towards land where you think there's space for a village. The priority in the early game is to find villages and ruins before your opponent. Kickoo has higher rates of fish compared to other tribes. On land, Kickoo has lower mountain rates than other tribes, but fruit, farm, animal, and forest rates are normal. Don't forget about shorelines. Shorelines outline the side of the water tile that has land on that side. If you have a hard time seeing the shoreline, tap on the tile to highlight it in the corner. Here, I can tell there must be land on this tile with water around it. I move the warrior along the strip of land. I check the shorelines again and realize there must be more land connection that I can send my warrior along. Sure enough, I find more land. For water maps like archipelago and continents, you typically send your first and sometimes your second warrior onto the land to look for villages. After that, you want to get on the water. However, don't get a port until you're ready to use it. Once you are ready to put down ports, think about the placement carefully. Plan your ports to optimize the connections to the capital and upgrade with population. You may be tempted to get an explorer in your second or third city, but weigh the pros and costs as well as the timing. Without sailing, your explorer cannot go onto deep water tiles. So consider the map type. For maps with a lot of land, or maybe continents maps where you can tell from the shoreline that land is near, you may risk sending out an explorer. Since Kickoo starts with the fishing tech, the explorer can traverse shallow water tiles. For maps with deep ocean, you may be better off waiting to get an explorer until you get the sailing tech. And while it's important to get vision on your opponent, often you can get vision with scouts instead of explorers, and you might prefer the income from the workshop. Here's an archipelago example. On turn 5, Merkek picks up his third city. Even though he can see the shoreline indicating land, he chooses not to get an explorer. He optimizes his port placement to build his economy. On turn 6, he puts more units in the water. Then, on turn 7, he gets sailing and scouts. With vision of his opponent's borders, he finds a target and attacks. Let's take a moment to talk about ports. Ports form city connections over water tiles between other ports no more than 4 water tiles away. 5 tiles between ports is too far to reach. Also, for connections to work, water tiles between the ports cannot be blocked by fog or by an opponent's city borders. If an opponent's borders cut off a port connection to a capital, those cities will lose the population. Connection between ports can sometimes go through cities. However, there are special rules. First, the water route can go through at most 1 city. Second, the city's corresponding port must be a higher priority relative to Northwest. So what does that mean? First, identify the city that you expect the port connection to go through. That city is where you want the connection to happen. Let's call that city Tinder. Next, you want that city's port to make a connection. Let's call that port Pink. Pink wants to make a connection with another port. Let's call that other port Blue. So count how many tiles each port is from the northwest edge of the map. If the pink port that's next to the connection city is closer to the northwest edge of the map than the other port, Blue, then they will form a connection through Tinder. Let's look at some examples. Here, I want to place a port to the south of Ocean City. My opponent Polaris is on that side, and I want better access to attack from that side. There are 4 tiles between the port in Tistic if the connection goes through that Ocean City. But will it work? So Ocean is the connecting city. The port the connecting city would go here. However, that connecting city port is further away from the northwest edge of the map than the other port in Tistic, so the connection does not work. On the same map, I want to connect a port on the southeast side of Dopey to the port on the west side of Zero. It will work, but through which city connection? Only one city will allow a connection between those 2 ports. If Dopey is the connection city, then the connection city port, aka Pink, would be here, and Blue would be here. Pink is farther away from the northwest edge of the map than Blue, so Dopey cannot be the connecting city. However, if Sino is the connecting city, then its port becomes that connection city port. In that case, Pink is closer to the northwest edge of the map than Blue, so the connection can go through Sino. In the event that both ports are equidistant from the northwest edge of the map, the tiebreaker is if the connection city port is closer to the north corner of the map. In this example, the connecting city port, Pink, is below Blue, so the 2 will not connect. But here, the connection city port in Pink is above Blue further north, so they will connect. And now, a word from our sponsor. Love the open ocean? Looking for adventure on the high seas? Want a life in a tropical paradise? For those who love the water, play Kickoo. Kickoo. Eat delicious banus and fish. Gather precious starfish. Sail across vast oceans and bombard distant coasts with your powerful navy. Feel like a little role play as pirates? With a ragu skin, you can shiver your timbers, pillage lost booty, and send your enemies to Davy Jones' locker. Kickoo, for the water lovers. For best results, play on water rafts. Starfish rates not guaranteed. Kickoo is not responsible for defective or incomplete port connections. Contact your local pro if Kickoo is right for you. Next, let's talk about naval tactics. While this is a Kickoo strategy guide, these tips about how to fight on the water can apply to any tribe. You have 5 basic naval units: rafts, scouts, rammers, juggernauts, and bombers. We're excluding cloak and dagger boats from this discussion. Rafts are simple unit transports. They cannot attack or retaliate if attacked. You may explore with rafts a bit in the early game, but you risk getting them killed if you send them into water without an escort to protect them. If you are exploring with rafts, consider using them in tandem to leapfrog and clear out more fog together. Remember, you can only upgrade rafts in your or an ally's borders. So only send a raft out if you plan to use it to capture a ruin, village, or maybe a starfish. Deciding between getting rammers or scouts depends on how much vision you have on your opponent and how immediate is the threat of combat. Generally, scouts are more useful than rammers when you want to explore and if there's no immediate threat of a naval battle. Rammers are better than scouts when you have decent vision on your target and are in range to attack. Another way to think about scouts versus rammers is that scouts are the equivalent to archers with some vision, and rammers are equivalent to swordsmen. However, unlike archers and swords, Scouts and rammers both cost 5 stars. So as far as attack and defense power, rammers are more bang for your buck than scouts. However, once you get into the mid-game, you typically need both. Scouts can be used as support units to rammers. If a scout attacks first, you can avoid retaliation damage and soften up an enemy rammer for killing with your own rammer. Also, once you get into the mid and late game, investing in a strategy tech so you can put defenders into naval units helps with their hit points. A warrior rammer can one-shot a warrior scout, but a defender scout can survive and do retaliation damage. However, be careful about using rammers to attack land units. If a rammer kills a unit on land, the unit will disembark and the rammer disappears, which is kind of a waste of 5 stars. So scouts are usually better than rammers for fighting units on the shore. If you do attack and land a unit with a rammer, only do it if you think it's worth losing the 5 stars you paid to get the rammer, like sieging a big city with a defender rammer. Now to bombers. Bombers are very expensive, and building them mindlessly is a good way to kill your economy. Just like scouts are like archers and rammers are like swordsmen, bombers are like catapults. They are slow, vulnerable, and powerful. Here's some effective ways to use them. First, make sure your bombers are protected by either a strip of land or a line of allied naval units. You can use it to lock down an enemy city, port, or narrow passage of water. This way, the opponent is forced to stop making units or give you free kills. There's also the threat of a bomber. This works if you have a raft within your borders that can be upgraded to a bomber and attack on the next turn. This forces the enemy to treat the raft as a bomber, but you don't have to spend the stars yet. Here's an example. IMO puts a defender in a raft. Saimanti knows that IMO has the navigation tech because they had bombers in a previous turn. So Saimanti is forced to send in a boosted hexapod to target the raft. Next turn, IMO puts another defender in a raft, another potential bomber looming on the horizon. Again, Saimanti has to sacrifice a unit to hit the raft. Remember, the navigation tech isn't just for bombers. If you can pick up the navigation tech and get enough starfish to either break even or gain a net profit, then definitely go for it. Using juggernauts in the water is very similar to using giants on land. You can use them to break through enemy lines by having more targets than they can kill in a single turn. Like an early giant, a single juggernaut is strong versus a small number of opponents. 2 juggernauts in tandem can push away enemy bombers or rammers while you build some navy and establish defense. Advance forward to limit enemy maneuvers due to the zone of control. Juggernauts are also good for sieging. Landing them on enemy shores is generally good as they lose that stiff ability and will start retaliating from melee hits. However, beware that Houdini, especially on archipelago maps. If your giant is surrounded and all the land tiles are blocked, that giant will disappear when they pop their own giant. Other juggernaut tips. Direct damage from a juggernaut is 2 times higher than its splash damage. So placing your juggernauts next to an enemy juggernaut is not a good idea. Just like putting your giant next to an enemy giant is not great. Lastly, let's talk a little bit about how to play Kickoo on land. So what if you're playing Kickoo on a map like Pangaea or Drylands? You usually still get a workshop and move your warriors towards the best direction to find villages. Then you get more units to find more villages and prepare to fight on land. It's a lot like any other tribe. If you have a lot of animals, this could mean going hunting and archery. If not, riders and roads could work well on land. Again, just like any other tribe. In some continent scenarios, if there's one tile strip of water, sometimes we call that a river, between the land masses, going for riders, roads, and a bridge can be more effective than getting a navy. Here I went for ports and ships, while my opponent went for riders, roads, and later got a bridge to connect the two continents. That gave them access to siege my cities. One last naval tip: while it's not actually a naval tactic, land units on the shore can be used to create a zone of control or threaten other naval units. Here, the warrior parks itself next to an opponent port, making it nearly impossible to use. We have some great replay reviews of Kickoo Drylands maps. There are links in the description. Before we go, a huge thanks to these Poly Champions players for their help making this guide. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe. It helps us a lot. Did we miss any good tips about playing Kickoo? Let us know in the comments. Join our Discord. Come play with us. A link to the Discord is in the description. Take care. See you on the next one.